Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome at this webinar for the GÉANT Cybersecurity Awareness Campaign. My name is Davina, and I work for the GÉANT project. Today we are hosting this webinar with Anna Collard as part of our annual Cybersecurity Awareness Campaign with the tagline, "Be mindful, stay safe." So for those of you who don't know GÉANT, let me just quickly introduce the organization. GÉANT delivers a worldwide network and a portfolio of services for the research and education sector in Europe. We do also operate a pan-European infrastructure known as the GÉANT network. And we run a membership organization for Europe's national research and education networks, the GÉANT Association. So every year we are organizing a campaign for Cybersecurity Month. And this year's theme is Cyber Mindfulness as a powerful tool against AI threats. So as you all know, with the rise of Gen AI, it has become easier than ever to manipulate people through deepfakes, through voice cloning, AI-written phishing emails, and even digital identity fraud. So attackers are not just targeting systems, they are targeting our minds, exploiting emotions like urgency, shame, or authority to bypass our logic. So that's why our campaign tagline encouraged everyone to pause, to reflect, and to apply digital mindfulness. As part of the campaign, we have also developed a lot of new awareness materials, from short videos for social media to leaflets, one-pagers, banners, and much more. Many of these resources are also available in several languages, so please keep an eye on the GÉANT Security website because we will officially launch the campaign next week. The topic of digital mindfulness brings us straight to today's webinar, and we're very excited to welcome Anna Collard. Anna is a Senior Vice President at KnowBe4 Africa. She's a recognized leader in behavioral science and cybersecurity training. In this webinar, Anna will introduce you the concept of digital mindfulness, a practical way to strengthen resilience against AI-driven phishing and social engineering. Instead of only warning about threats, she will show how attention training and emotional regulation can help us stay calm and think clear and make safer choices online. At the end of the webinar, we will also have time for questions. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to already put them in the chat. Anna, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Davina, and thank you everyone for dialing in. It's an honor to be here. Let me quickly share my slides. Yes, so thanks so much again for having me. This is a topic I'm personally really passionate about. And just a little bit about myself. Davina has kindly introduced me already. I won't bore you with my background, but I think what's important to highlight is that I have spent more than 20 years in cybersecurity. And I've probably the last 10 years or so, I've purely focused on the human factor and how to, help people stay safe online and organizations to run awareness training. So you'd think that someone with my background, wouldn't click on phishing emails, but I have to take you back probably about 2 years ago, 3 years ago now, into an Uber car where I was driving here in Cape Town. It was after hours. I was driving to pick up my own car. And so it was already after dark, and I was watching outside, if everything was safe. I was also speaking to the driver, who was very friendly. I was packing my handbag, and at the same time, I was also checking my emails on my phone. And I still don't know how they did this, but in that exact moment, our IT department or security department sent me this particular phishing test or phishing simulation email. And, I hope you can read it on your side, but if you look at it when you're sitting in front of your computer and you're focusing, it's a very very obvious phishing email with a low-grade form of fear, threatening me to deactivate the account if I don't update my user. So as a security professional, I should have really picked this up and reported it as a phish. But for some reason, in that Uber car, being so distracted by so many things, I clicked on it. And then as a consequence or punishment, however you want to look at it, the IT department or the security guys made me take a training module that I've developed myself a couple of years ago. And this experience was so pivotal in my career because I realized, okay, I really don't need more training. I know how to hover over a phishing link. And I usually know what to spot, to identify these scams. But what they did that was really interesting as well is they sent out a survey to ask, Anna, when you failed this phishing test, where were you? What was your emotional state? What happened? And I said, this is really interesting data because I work for a security awareness company. Really, I shouldn't be clicking on phishing emails, neither should my colleagues, but they do. And in more than half of the cases, if you look here, 53% of the incidents where people clicked on phishing simulation tests, they did so not because of a lack of training, but because they were busy, multitasking, distracted. And this really this is why I'm always telling the story because it made me go down this whole research route of what I'm sharing with you now, this digital mindfulness story and meta awareness. I found when I started looking into it, I found a report by a company called Tessian. They looked at the reasons behind people falling for phishing scams, not just the simulations, but the actual phishing scams. And again, very similar stats. So also in about half of the cases, they said that distraction is the reason of why people, click on phishing scams. Distraction is also the reason why we send the wrong email to the wrong person, which I've also done before. So what I want to do today is this is just the introduction to this topic, but I really wanted to share this story because it made me deep dive into this. In fact, it got me into the whole academic route. Now I'm busy doing research because I find it so fascinating that a trained cybersecurity professional can also make mistakes. In fact, there was just a recent report about Troy Hunt, who also failed he actually clicked on a real phishing email. So it really can happen to all of us. And then I will introduce this concept of digital mindfulness and then how can we bring this in practically in our organizations or your institutions to build more secure human risk management or security cultures. And Davina, you mentioned AI, yes, definitely. I think generative AI and AI has empowered and scaled up criminal operations, but the science behind the deception and the manipulation has been around for many, many years. And that hasn't changed, by the way. So in order to deceive someone or manipulate someone, what the criminals do, or not even just it spans beyond criminals. It's also the platform providers, the disinformation actors. They have to start with a storyline, with some sort of narrative that exploits a human vulnerability and then delivers the actual ultimate goal, which could be, stealing of money or information or getting somebody to believe in something that's not in their best interest, changing perceptions. But it always is a storyline and the actual, deepfake, for example, or the phishing or the voice call is just an artifact that is part of the storyline construct. And that's really important to remember is that, there's a lot of hype around deepfakes and obviously, using AI empowered templates to make the deceptions look more professional. But ultimately, we have to remember those are narrative-based attacks. And those, whether it's AI generated or not, are just little artifacts. And even to give you an example, I'm sorry I have to bring him up, but Donald Trump is very good in this deceptive kind of artifacts delivery when it comes to story delivering. For example, when the South African president was in the White House, and there was a storyline about white genocide in South Africa, which is, by the way, it's not true. But the artifact that was presented to the media was not a deepfake generated image. It wasn't even a cheap fake. It was a real image, but taken in the wrong context. And that is very dangerous in polarization and disinformation campaigns. Because again, it supports the narrative. So the message here is it doesn't actually matter whether it's highly sophisticated or not. In the wrong context or taken out of context, these real images or cheap fakes can be just as effective. And ultimately, there's this thing called the plausibility effect that also explains why certain scams, even the really bad ones, the ones that you would look at and you think, this is like so easy to spot. Why do people fall for this? Because they don't have to be perfectly fake. They don't have to look great. They just need to be plausible enough. And then it can get people to believe in it or manipulate people. It's the so-called plausibility effect. This was, by the way, an example of a scam where Taylor Swift got impersonated, and in the actual the scam video, you can see that the imagery used is a much younger Taylor Swift, yet so many people fell for it and bought the product that never arrived because it was plausible enough to think that she would endorse this type of product, and people were, hoping that they could get it. There we go. And something that I find really interesting from an academic's point of view is that Professor Katos from, I think it's Bournemouth University, they've recently come up with a paper where they explain the human cyber kill chain. And it just shows you that for these narrative-based attacks or social engineering, human-based attacks, the attackers or the criminals follow a certain kill chain or a certain modus operandi. And as the defender, we need to realize that certain points in that kill chain, like, for example, our emotions, our psychology, the rapport generation, are just steps or hops in that particular kill chain. And if we understand it or look at the problem from that framework, it might be easier to then address certain counter effects. And if we now dive into the actual vulnerability factors, like what makes us humans susceptible to these narrative-based manipulation attempts or deceptive attacks, when in my research, I looked at it across 5 different categories, from cognitive to behavioral, psychological, situational, and demographic factors. And I've identified 33 factors that are documented in literature, of which one of those are cognitive biases. And cognitive biases, there are more than 200 that are currently documented in academic research that unfortunately, make us vulnerable or susceptible to online manipulation, social engineering. And just to give you some examples, like optimism bias is at play when we tend to just think bad things happen to other people, not to us. This is just one of those heuristics that our brains are programmed in. So it means that we tend to take more risks than is necessarily good for us. We also tend to just believe people first before we mistrust them. So the trust bias is at play. Dunning-Kruger effect is a wonderful kind of reality, particularly amongst technology staff or IT people who believe, oh, we know better, we don't fall for social engineering attacks. And that slightly overconfidence, sometimes even arrogance, is actually our downfall as well. Another effect that I think is something really important to remember is that, and this is, again, this gets used or abused by criminals as well as disinformation actors a lot, also politicians, is that if something is emotionally charged, if something has a a very strong emotional trigger, it's much easier for our brains to process because we don't have to analyze it. It goes straight into our sort of emotional processing, our amygdala. And if it's easy to process, which emotional content is, it's much easier. We don't have to think very hard to understand it. Then we tend to believe it's true even if it's not. That's an illusory truth effect. So that's again, emotional language, imagery is so powerful because we just find it much easier to understand, and then we tend to share it and click and believe in it. Another bias or effect that's at play is the mere exposure effect, which I find fascinating as well, is that the more you see something, and the more you like it, even if you didn't like it in the beginning. And this applies to people as well, by the way. So the more you see someone, the more you will end up liking that person. And again, from a polarization, from a disinformation point of view, manipulation point of view, that's obviously very powerful to abuse. So anyway, because this is like a academic research network, I wanted to share the literature with you. I'm not going to bore you with all the detail, but it's just to show you how complex human behavior really is in the digital space. And if we look at it from a context of my little Uber story, you can see here all the factors that were at play that made me vulnerable, from the multitasking, my mood, personality trait, also the situation. It was afternoon, so I was hungry. I was distracted, but then there were also certain factors that were at play that positively influenced me. The fact that I have some expertise, that we do a lot of cybersecurity training, meant that even though I clicked on that fish, I didn't submit my credentials. So I was very quick to realize, oh my gosh, I did something wrong. So these factors can be positive or negative, but they definitely influence our behavior. And then if we think about traditional awareness training, and including myself, I've done the same kind of mistake, or delivered it that way, is that we often start with the so-called fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and depict pictures of people in hoodies, and it's scary, scary, and then we tell people what they should be doing, like the rules to follow. And that only works to a certain extent, because if we look at all these factors that I've just mentioned, those cognitive factors, the heuristics, the cognitive biases, the psychological, like the how easy are you emotionally triggered, our personality traits. If I'm more higher on that neurotic spectrum, I'm more I'm more sensitive. I'm easier emotionally manipulated. Behavioral factors. So all of those are at play, and a rule-based training program that will just scare me and then tell me what to do is not going to help in a lot of these factors, right? Like it might address two or three of them in terms of my level of understanding and knowledge, but it will not help me in terms of addressing impulsivity or cognitive biases, for example. And then the question is, well, how do we then address this? Like, is there a patch for this human vulnerability operating system? And I believe there is, actually, and I'm going to share with you what that is. And this is really what this talk is all about. It's about digital mindfulness, or mindfulness in general, if we have had to define it. And there are various definitions of it, but one of the most commonly used is by Kabat-Zinn, and he said that mindfulness is literally just paying attention to the here and now, or to the present moment, without judgment, without telling yourself a story about it, just being aware of what's going on. Another definition of mindfulness is that it's a form of self-regulating your attention. And I think that's also very powerful in terms of how we could possibly apply this in a digital space. And then from a research point of view, mindfulness training has been applied obviously in the health, that kind of sort of therapeutic point of view, but also in areas such as the military. There's been lots of experiments and research that has been done with the US Army in terms of the focusing and attention ability after and before doing mindfulness training. And if we think about, recruits that go out into war, they really have to act under pressure. They have to make very quick decisions, sometimes life and death decisions, and be able to hold multiple things in their mind. So their cognitive flexibility has to be really, really high. And there's lots of evidence that the recruits that have undergone a form of mindfulness training, just 12 minutes a day, by the way. So I'm not talking about, um, you know, like 2 hour long yoga sessions every day. Not at all. It's just 12 minutes of attention-based mindfulness training, has shown a significant improvement in their cognitive faculty and their cognitive flexibility. And one of the quotes here is that I really like is that it's almost like slowing down time. It's like slow motion. Even though you have to act very quickly, your brain can, in that moment, hold multiple aspects. And this is what cognitive agility and flexibility is all about, is our ability to see multiple things from different perspectives, including some meta-awareness, understanding what's going on inside of us, and then using all of these points of information and then making a decision. And even though the real time is very fast and very quick, all of this is happening when you apply mindfulness. And there's also been quite a bit of academic research already been conducted in the cyber mindfulness space. I'm just listing some of them here. But to summarize it, there have been tests that have shown people that have undergone some form of mindfulness-based training are better in detecting and flagging phishing or social engineering attempts. They're better in general with decision making in digital spaces. It fosters a more reflective kind of sense making ability, and just general improvement in cognitive ability. And I just wanted to highlight one paper because this is really good. So again, if we go back to what I shared earlier, this traditional security awareness training would focus on the fear factor and then tell us what to do, how to investigate, how to hover over a URL, for example, how to validate, how to research, and then also how to deal with it. Do we report the social engineering attempt to be deleted? This is predominantly how sort of traditional training focused on it. What this researcher found out is when he analyzed security experts and how they respond to phishing emails, not like me, that's an Uber car, but like when they do the right thing, what happens is that there is a step before this investigation and the dealing with the problem. And this is what he calls sense making. And sense making is the ability to very quickly discern that something isn't quite right. They're aware of their emotions and they're slowing down when it matters. And this is not to say that you have to slow down for every email because that's impossible. That's not what this is about at all. It's about being able to very quickly see, I've got 300 emails. Most of them are, I don't know, I can just delete them or I'll work on them. But there's one that feels just a bit weird. I'll slow down now and I do the steps that I've been taught. And that is that digital mindfulness, is that sense making, that interoception to realize something is triggering me to slow down. And in my research, I then found out, just based on the literature review, that out of those 33 factors that make us susceptible and vulnerable in digital spaces, mindfulness can address 23 of them positively. The way that this is done is through stress reduction, more meta-awareness, cognitive enhancement, and emotional regulations. All of those are verified benefits of mindfulness practice, and all of those, if we map them back to those susceptibility factors, can really, including your personality trait, including your cognitive biases, positively influence those kind of traits that we have, or those factors that make us susceptible. And again, it's very important because a lot of critics of the mindfulness approach will come and say, Anna, yeah, you can't be slow all the time. You can't be mindful and look at everything in a slow fashion. And that's not what we're saying at all. What I'm saying is we have to foster that ability to discern when we need to slow down. And it's not for every single email. It's not for every single interaction. And to best describe that is, I live in South Africa, in Cape Town, wonderful city, but I have to travel to Johannesburg quite a lot. And what happens is when I arrive in Johannesburg, I'm automatically much more vigilant than I am in Cape Town. Maybe for the wrong reasons, because Cape Town is probably not that much safer, but there's like Johannesburg is known that it's more dangerous. So what happens as soon as I arrive in Johannesburg, I'm not stressed, I'm not paranoid, I'm just more vigilant. I'll put my handbag at the bottom of the car, I'll lock my car, I'll look around, and I'm just more vigilant. And this is the same kind of built-in second nature vigilance or zero trust mindset that we need to develop in our users when they're dealing with, particularly, for example, if they deal with payments, when they deal with handing over personal information, when they in an environment where it can be dangerous if they do the wrong thing. And another term for it is also this so-called zero trust mindset. All of us that work in cybersecurity, obviously, we've heard this term being thrown around for a while in the networks sort of networking space. But if we apply that concept, which really is to configure systems that they not trust anything by default and verify before they let anything in, if we apply this to the human mind, then we can say it's this exact kind of subconscious or second nature vigilance that comes with a healthy dose of skepticism, pausing before reacting impulsively, and just engaging more intentionally with certain, not all, with certain requests that warrant it. And then obviously, so this is great from a theory point of view, but how do we actually get people to change their behavior? Like, how do we get them to apply this in their daily lives? And again, science can help us with this, particularly behavioral science. BJ Fogg is sort of the grandfather of behavioral science, and he came up with the BJ Fogg behavior design model. And what that tells us is we can get people to change if we do three things. We have to motivate them. We have to get them interested in actually wanting to change, embracing the concept. We have to equip them with the ability. So we have to give them the tools that make it easy for them to apply the change. And then lastly, we have to remind them constantly, like the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, says like rather do lots of little reminders all the time than just one big training course a year. This won't help. So those three together, if they come together in a campaign or in a change management program, that's very powerful in getting the people on board and getting them to embrace the new behavior. And under prompts, so the third feature of this behavior model, there are various ways we can create these reminders. And some of them, by the way, and those are the most powerful ones, is if you can create healthy habits, and those prompts are actually internal impulses. We all know them from maybe the bad behavior. We all have impulses to grab our phones and look at our phones, I don't know, on average like 160 times a day or whatever crazy number. Those are internally habituated prompts that make us do certain things, not always the right thing. But if we can help people to, create those internal impulses to do the right thing, to slow down when it matters, to report something when it matters, that's really powerful. And the way we can artificially sort of induce those or help them build those habits is through systems-based interventions. For example, those banners in emails. Not every single email can have a banner, because then our brain will just, it will ignore it. So selectively implemented banners that will tell you, look, this looks suspicious, you may want to slow down. Second chance sort of friction that gets introduced. Those are all little prompts and in the moment nudges that can help, help building those behaviors. And then, yes, of course, we have to also educate. We have to bring in an awareness concept, training people about their own human vulnerability. Like, people have to understand that, for example, multitasking is really bad for us, and that it makes us vulnerable to being scammed. The latest scam, the latest sort of AI-driven deepfakes or impersonation scams, we also have to practice that sort of habituation that I've mentioned earlier. And there's the prevalence effect says that if we block all the phishing emails, which is what we should be doing, of course, but if people never see those phishing attacks, they will forget how to deal with it. So we have to actually expose them in a healthy manner as frequently as possible to those scams to those phishing emails in simulation so that they know how to deal with them when and if a real phishing email gets through. The same with incident response. We have to practice, we have to simulate what we're doing, otherwise we'll just forget. And then to make it easy and empower our people, we have to provide them with tools that, a best example I can always think about is a password manager. If the policies is you shall have 16-digit long passwords, it's not possible. No human brain can remember that. So we need to equip them with the right tools to make it easier. And also introduce the psychological safety that it's okay for people to ask, is this safe? I'm not sure I want to do this. Can I verify first? So that kind of culture needs to come from the top. The ability to allow people to slow down, which in this fast-paced, AI-driven world is challenging. But this really needs to be driven from the top because, and ironically, actually, when we slow down, we get stuff done in a much better and more productive way. In fact, again, there's a quote by the military that goes something like, "Slow is fast, and fast is good," or something like that. Like they really embrace the concept that by slowing down in a moment, by being mindful in a moment, you make less mistakes and you actually get more done. And then I just thought I'll share some practical examples of how other organizations have introduced the concept. I work very closely with a local bank in South Africa, and they've been running cyber mindfulness or digital mindfulness as part of their awareness programs for a couple of years now. And what they've done really nicely is that they collaborate closely with their corporate well-being teams. And the way they started it off is that, at least in South Africa, October is also our National Mental Health Month. So October Cyber Awareness and Mental Health Month, those were, two excuses to work together. And they've been on roadshows together with the corporate wellness team where the wellness or HR team would bring in insurance providers that measures your heart rate. And then the cyber team was there. And people were in the beginning, they're like, why is cyber on the wellness day? And they were like, well, because if you're stressed, if you're multitasking, if you're annoyed, you make mistakes. So let us explain the concept. And then people really understood it and embraced it. So they've done a couple of interventions from videos and posters, like the usual thing that's been quite fun and successful. And I know Christine, who's the awareness manager there, is always happy to share what they've done. And then another thing I wanted to just highlight is that the Aspen Digital Group have created a Take 9 campaign. So Take 9 stands for Take 9 Seconds, which is very similar to the concept that only when or if something feels slightly off, and you listen to your intuition, to pause for those 9 seconds before reacting impulsively. And they have some really fun videos and material that anyone can download or work with. And then also, obviously, the GÉANT organization is launching the Be Mindful, Stay Safe campaign that is coming out next week, Wednesday on the 24th. And there as well there will be videos and material posters that the member organizations can use, or I think even the public can use to bring in that mindfulness concept. And then I just thought, before we open it up for questions, I just wanted to share 3 practical steps that you can take back into your life, into your daily sort of cyber world, and maybe share with your users. And those 3, and this is always when people ask me that if you can only do three things, even though you can do so much more, but those 3 things I think are the most important ones. It's to avoid multitasking. It's to develop that meta awareness and use the power of pausing when it matters. And let's just go through those 3. So starting with multitasking, I'm a mother, I'm a woman. We get told, oh, you can multitask. We cannot. Like, no human can multitask. It's really bad for us, by the way. Every time we switch between 2 top cognitive tasks, we end up using energy or glucose in our brains. It makes us tired. It makes us frazzled. And there's also an addictive component to that because you do tend to get a dopamine hit if you switch and then you see like a WhatsApp message and you go back to your work. So unfortunately, there is this, particularly media multitasking is dopamine inducing, has an addictive side to it, but it actually can cause a lot of negative side effects, including mental health issues like depression, etc. And here's the research. It also, as proven, evidenced by my own anecdotal experience, it makes us much riskier in terms of our online behavior. So what can we do? Well, let's not multitask, like be conscious about single tasking. I know certain jobs, obviously, if it's operational, you have to take different calls. You can't really plan it. But in other environments, if you can, like just use the Pomodoro technique, 25 to 45 minutes of single focusing on one thing at a time with rests in between and really slowing down. Like I cannot stress this enough. Like the more we slow down and are mindful while we eat, for example, this is a great mindfulness exercise to just eat while you eat and not be on the phone as well. All of us have to eat every day. So the people that say, I don't have time for mindfulness, it's not true. You have to eat. And when you eat for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, try and eat mindfully. Like be aware of the taste, be there, like touch the food and use that as your mindfulness practice, for example. The number two is to use our emotions as an alarm system. So what I mean by that is when something triggers you, positive or negatively, and I know, I mean, we emotional animals, everything has some emotional attachment, but if it's slightly too much, even positively, if you feel so good when you meet someone or somebody flatters you, that could be a sign of being manipulated, which the social engineers do as well, right? On LinkedIn or wherever these fake job offers, they always work with flattery, or a low grade form of urgency or fear, using authority. You know, all of these mechanisms are being used by these deceptive narrative-based attacks. So if you feel something and the way you can hone it is through what's called interoception, so being aware of our body's response to a certain impulse or a certain a trigger, your heart rate might go up, or you feel like a little bit more elevated, or even on the opposite. That's a sign that something is going on. Somebody might be manipulating you, and it's very important to then slow down to a more intentional response and not just an impulsive reaction. Another thing to really, and the psychologists call it the halt state of mind. You know, if I'm hungry, if I'm angry, lonely, or tired. By the way, for the parents, kids should never be on their devices if they're in that state, hungry, angry, lonely, tired. Then we are known to make bad decisions in life as well as in the digital space. So when you're in that state, maybe don't pay invoices, maybe don't do your critical emails. Just something to be aware of, to the fact that when we're in that state, we are much more vulnerable. And then how can we slow down? Like how can you actually slow down in the moment when it matters? Well, through breathing. Breath work is such a powerful free tool that we all have access to. And in fact, just an easy 6-second exhale. So if you exhale for longer than you inhale, it will activate your parasympathetic nervous system, which is your rest and digest kind of relaxed, more state of mind. And it's in that state that we can take more rational decisions that are not fear-based or not triggered. And literally, I know that the Aspen campaign says take 9. It literally just takes 6 seconds to calm down your amygdala, and then maybe another 3 seconds to then think about, okay, what do I want to do? And again, you know, I use the army a lot as an example, because I know that some people might say, oh, Anna, this mindfulness and breathing, that's very woo-woo. It's not. It's really, there's so much scientific evidence. It's been used in very male-dominated environments very, very effectively. The US Navy SEALs use something called tactical breath work, and it's box breathing, where you count to 4 on an inhale, you hold for 4, and you exhale for 4. Again, that really helps you to regulate your nervous system, to calm down when needed, and in stressful situations especially. And another way to slow down is through movement. We all sitting in front of our computer a lot. Something that you can do, all of us can do that, is to activate your spinal movement. And this is through these swimming motions. I do that a lot in between, if I can't get up in between calls, like just moving your arms like that in these sort of swimming motions is very important because A, it makes you sit up straight, you can breathe properly, and it moves your spine. Your spine is where we hold a lot of the adrenal glands that release positive and negative emotions. So just to open that up is a very, very important health benefit that will also keep you more alert when you're online. So those are the three tactics that you can maybe take back into your teams and share with your users, focusing on single tasking, use emotions as a warning signal, and using tactical breath work and spinal movements to actually slow down in the moments when it matters, as well as in between sort of work snippets. And then obviously, it's always about technology and the human factor. We can't rely on the human factor by itself. This is impossible. We have to obviously protect our humans with technology as much as possible, and use AI to defend against AI-driven attacks as much as possible. And it's really amazing what can be done now also with AI agents to help with the actual sort of noise, analysis and going through anything that's sort of, detecting behavior that's out of the unusual, um, identifying patterns. That's really where AI is really good. But the humans, us, we can't compete with AI on speed and pattern recognition, of course not. But where we are really strong at is in this cognitive flexibility, this meta awareness that I spoke about, in bringing in ethical judgments and that sort of that gut feeling, that sense making, that we can bring into situations. And that lastly, this is really it. Like cognitive flexibility is such a super core skill that we will need in the future, even more so than today. That ability to step back, to slow down, to look at things from different perspectives. This is what is our edge in that manipulation game, particularly in the AI-driven manipulation game. And again, for the parents in the room, cognitive flexibility is linked to spatial intelligence. So it's really important that we foster spatial intelligence, which, by the way, develops from the ages 2 to 8, with your kids. Less devices, more play with spatial things like Lego and building blocks and nature and drawing. Those are all ways of teaching our brain to see things three-dimensionally and develop that spatial intelligence. And that's it from my point of view. I think we still have 15 minutes for Q&A, but just to summarize the whole thing, social engineers as well as disinformation actors, any form of manipulators, use narrative-based attacks. They use a story to exploit our human vulnerabilities beyond just our knowledge. There's so much psychology and cognitive vulnerabilities that they exploit. But using mindfulness and scientifically proven mindfulness combined with behavior design can really help us foster this zero trust mindset. And then lastly, obviously, we have to collaborate or work with the technology. And I think that is the most effective way in keeping us, our people, and our network safe. So, yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Anna, for this very insightful presentation. I haven't seen any questions in the chat at this point, but if you have questions from Anna, please don't hesitate. Maybe in the meantime, I can kick off with a question, Anna. If an organization wants to implement digital mindfulness in the whole organization, you stressed out the fact that it's really important to work together with the HR teams, and I completely agree with that. But what could be the potential pitfalls, and do you have an advice on how to avoid them?
Yes. So some of the, and if anybody's interested, I've got, in fact, let me share it. I've got much more information about this because that's what I wrote my master's in, like how to actually run it. Let me just make sure I'm sharing the right screen. But what's really important is that that we get the scientific evidence in front of the leadership. right? Like it's important to get your leaders involved, and the way you do this is by using evidence-based neuroscience, that kind of that language. So explaining the why, then coming up with the what, like what sort of practices are practical in your organization. Like for example, meditation is not that meditation, as great as it is, I love it. I'm a yoga teacher, right? But in organizational settings, it's not appropriate. Meditation can be trauma triggering. So offering meditation has to be done in a very, very safe space, and it's maybe not appropriate for a cyber mindfulness campaign. So, but there's lots of other things one can do. And then, like I said, you have to start with your executive leadership. Bring it there first because they would lead it. Luckily, for example, in that bank I work with, they've embraced mindfulness as a leadership practice already. So it's quite pervasive throughout the organization. But in other organizations, it might still be a new concept. So you have to convince the leaders first, and then work with communications department, with the HR, with corporate wellness together as a holistic campaign. And also, but particularly, I think in university settings, having ambassadors, like you would already have people that are excited about this just from a productivity and a focus point of view. I know Oxford University offers mindfulness-based stress reduction courses to all of the students, I believe. So working with those like existing, let's call them uh, teams, and then bringing the cyber aspect into that is great because it will enhance their offering. And then bringing them into your campaign also means, hey, we're not just talking from IT, we're not just talking from a security point of view, and people are much more receptive to this. But yes, yeah, those are the kind of the feedback, the challenges uh, is that in certain organizations that might not be as mature yet from a mindfulness point of view, you have to first convince them. And also even the word mindfulness might be again in certain cultures. You have to be careful and maybe use other language. Like for example, zero trust mindset might be more applicable in a military environment, right? um, so yeah, so using different language also important for different audiences.
Yeah, completely. I also like the idea of working with ambassadors. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Um, I don't see any other questions in the chat. Oh, yes, there are some questions. There's a question from
Yeah.
Martin Parsons. You spoke of cyber awareness and other types of training being more effective if it was done in small sessions regularly rather than a longer annual refresher. But is there a cutoff when too often becomes less beneficial? And if so, when, where?
Yes, that's what's very interesting because there is that whole concept of cyber fatigue, right? When people hear too much of it, they're like, And what we found, and I've got a white paper I can share, which obviously KnowBe4 has done. We looked at all the data of our customers, and we found, interestingly enough, that the most effective way of training is to do frequent simulations, so do more phishing simulations, because that's a form of training, right? Not to penalize people, but to keep it top of mind. So the more often you can do that, preferably weekly, by the way, the most effective. And then that is more effective than doing like monthly training. And if you, like, I would say the sweet spot in terms of training is quarterly. If you do something monthly, I find it might get too much, but if you do, then it has to be very short and maybe just a scam of the month or like a little burst of information, not a whole training. But quarterly training, I think, again, shorter, not 20 minutes compliance-based training session. And I get it. Once a year, you have to do that from an audit point of view. But to keep it top of mind, I'd say between quarterly and monthly, being mindful of not overloading the users too much too. And
Mm,
keeping it, if something is relevant, there's a new scam out there. Like, for example, in Africa, we really, for parents, it's so important they understand the financial sextortion threat that targets teenagers, particularly teenage boys. This is something we must all talk about, right? And that's interesting for the parents. So yeah, so if something is interesting, then throw out the message. Yeah.
mhm. Okay, thank you. I think that answers Martin's question. Then there is not a question, more a remark from Bianca, saying some organization even stopping pressing people and rewarding multitasking would be a huge advancement. Yeah, completely agree with that. And then we
100%
can,
agree.
yeah. Also, from Sebastian on the AI age part, assuming the bad actor use of AI tools results in very good personalized and for more emotional threats or manipulation, is mindfulness still enough? All in all, it sounds like we have to be more human, again, less than simply functioning like a machine.
Oh yeah, I 100% agree, Sebastian. And this goes beyond just the cybersecurity threat, right? If we look at the addictiveness of chatbots that are engagement platforms, ultimately the business model of these platforms is to keep you hooked for as long as possible, and it creates this dependency amongst young people, especially. How do you then train a mind to not be so dependent to the machine and be sucked into this, whether it's social media or chatbot, etc. And again, I think this is where the humanness and the mindfulness aspect comes in, to explain to people what happens to your system when you get hooked. How can you break the cycle? How can you bring in more less dopamine, more sort of serotonin, oxytocin moments, which you get through real life, or even healthy dopamine is going for a walk in the forest. Our brains will reward us for that in a much healthier way than these like synthetic dopamine hits. But yeah, like I feel very strongly that because we are becoming more like machines, because we're so much more productive, which has an addictive side to it as well. Like, oh, I can achieve so much, like da, da, da. Um, it's unhealthy if we don't balance it with a more real life human approach.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, okay, I'm happy to to chat more about this offline as well.
Hmm. Yeah, Matthew is asking or saying, thank you for a really insightful presentation. Completely agree with him. Will it be shared? Yes, the recording will be shared afterwards with all attendees. Will also be put on the GÉANT YouTube channel. I see a lot of positive feedback, so thank you very much again, Anna.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry,
Um,
I speak so fast. I tried to get everything in. Yeah.
Yeah, so before we close, yeah, if there are no further questions, I would like you thank you all for joining today. A special thank you to Anna for sharing her insights with us. Before we close, my colleague will also put a link to the to our feedback survey in the chat. So we will kindly ask you to take just it will not take more than 2 minutes, even 1 minute, I think. And your feedback really helps us to improve and also shape future webinars. Speaking of webinars, we also kindly invite you to our next webinar. Will take place on the 23rd of October with Dr. Maria Bada on AI and cybersecurity. So also you will find the link in the chat. So don't hesitate to register for the webinar. And thank you once again for your time, your participation. And of course, we are very much looking forward to see you next time. Thank you,
Yeah, thanks so
everybody.
much.
Have a nice afternoon and hope to see you for our next webinar.
Davina and everyone, if you are on LinkedIn, I'm quite active there and very happy to have further conversations if
Okay.
you're interested.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so
Excellent.
much.
Bye,
Bye bye.
everyone. Bye.